My name is April Johnson, and I was 36 years old when my marriage quietly died at a Thanksgiving dinner table long before any papers were filed, long before the truth was confirmed, and long before I was ready to admit that the life I thought was solid had already cracked. Until 3 months ago, I believed I had a good marriage. Not perfect, no one's ever is, but stable, familiar, safe. My husband and I had been married for 7 years together, for 9 in total. We had routines, shared jokes, long Sunday mornings, and the kind of partnership that doesn't feel exciting but feels dependable, or at least that's what I told myself. Thanksgiving was at my in-laws' house that year, a big place, overly decorated, expensive in a way that always felt performative. My mother-in-law's equivalent in this family, my father-in-law Malcolm, had never liked me. From the moment his son introduced me, Malcolm decided I wasn't enough, not refined enough, not ambitious enough, too blue-collar for his taste. I built my business with my own hands. No fancy degree, no corporate pedigree, and to Malcolm, that made me temporary. For 9 years, I swallowed his comments. The digs about my simple work, the way he'd glance at my hands like they embarrassed him, the casual suggestions that his son could have done better. My husband always brushed it off. That's just how Dad is, and because I loved him or thought I did, I let it slide. That night, Malcolm sat across from me in the living room while the game droned on in the background. My husband was in the kitchen with his sister, half helping, half scrolling on his phone. I was nursing a drink, counting down the minutes until I could politely leave. Malcolm swirled his wine, leaned forward, and smiled, the kind of smile that means someone thinks they're about to enjoy themselves at your expense. "You know," he said casually, "I've always wondered why my son settled for you." I didn't rise to it. I never did. I just took a sip and waited. "Oh, don't be sensitive," he continued. "I'm just saying he could have had anyone. He almost did, actually, before you came along." I asked if there was a point. That's when he leaned closer and lowered his voice. "Don't expect loyalty from my son," Malcolm said. "It runs in the family." He laughed, not loudly, but confidently, like he'd just shared an inside joke. "My father wasn't loyal. I wasn't loyal," he went on. "And my son," he shrugged. "The apple doesn't fall far." Then he stood up and walked away, leaving me sitting there with a sentence that wouldn't let go of my chest. Most people would have brushed it off. Bitter father. Bad taste. One more insult. But something about the way he said it, the certainty, the timing felt wrong. This wasn't random. This felt like a confession disguised as a taunt. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying his words. "Don't expect loyalty. If it ever happened, don't be surprised." I watched my husband breathe beside me and wondered how long I'd been asleep while everyone else was awake. By morning, my intuition was screaming, and once I listened to it, there was no turning back. I didn't confront him the next morning. I didn't ask questions or fish for reassurance. I kissed him goodbye, watched him grab his keys, and listened to the door close behind him like it always did. The house felt the same, but something fundamental had shifted inside me. Malcolm's words had lodged themselves too deep to ignore, and pretending I hadn't heard them felt more dishonest than anything else I might do next. It was while my husband was in the shower that I did something I had never done before in our entire relationship. I picked up his phone. My hands weren't shaking. That surprised me. I'd always assumed that snooping would come with guilt or panic or a rush of adrenaline, but what I felt instead was a calm, clinical focus, like my brain had already accepted that this was necessary. I wasn't looking for drama. I was looking for confirmation. At first glance, nothing jumped out. No explicit messages, no obvious flirting, no late-night texts from unfamiliar names. But then I noticed something else, something quieter and more unsettling. His message history was almost empty. Threads didn't go back more than a few days. No long-running conversations. No months-old exchanges. And that made no sense. My husband was a digital hoarder. He still had emails from jobs he'd left years ago. He never deleted anything. I put the phone back exactly where I'd found it and said nothing when he came out of the bathroom. I made coffee. I asked about his plans for the day. I smiled. And while I did all of that, my gut was screaming. By Monday morning, I stopped telling myself I was being paranoid. I made my first call from my car parked 2 blocks away from my office. A friend of mine, recently divorced, had mentioned using a private investigator. At the time, I'd thought it sounded dramatic. Desperate. Now it sounded practical. He gave me the name of a retired law enforcement officer. Discreet, thorough, expensive. I paid $2,500 up front for 2 weeks of surveillance without hesitating. My second call was to a divorce attorney. Not to file. Not yet. I told myself it was just to understand my options, just to be informed. The attorney was calm, efficient, and unsettlingly neutral. She explained that adultery didn't automatically change asset division in our state, but it could affect credibility, alimony, and negotiations, especially if there was proof of planning or deception. My business, which I'd built before the marriage, was largely protected, but marital assets were still vulnerable. I hung up feeling like I'd just stepped into an alternate timeline, one where my marriage was already over and I was simply catching up. The next 2 weeks were the hardest of my life. I acted normal. I laughed at the right moments. I listened when he talked about work. I slept beside him while my mind ran through worst-case scenarios I hadn't yet earned the right to believe. The private investigator sent his first report on day 4. My husband had been leaving work early 3 times a week. He told me he had a new project that required longer hours, said he'd be home late, apologized in advance, like he was being considerate. According to the report, he was checking into the same hotel every time. By day 7, there were photos. Clear ones. Him and a woman I didn't recognize at first, walking through a parking lot together, holding hands, kissing beside his car, laughing the way people do when they think no one is watching. Walking into the hotel side by side like it was routine, like it was normal. I sat in my car in my own driveway and stared at those images until my eyes burned. 7 years of marriage. 9 years together, and he had been sneaking off to a hotel with someone else while texting me that he loved me. On day 10, the investigator identified her. She was his former college girlfriend, the one he'd dated for 4 years before me, the one he'd described as ancient history, the one he said he occasionally checked in on because they ended on good terms, the one Malcolm almost certainly knew about. That was the moment the disbelief finally left my body. What surprised me most wasn't the betrayal itself. It was the absence of shock. Some part of me had already accepted this outcome the night Malcolm spoke. The investigation didn't feel like discovery. It felt like confirmation. So I stopped asking why and started asking how. How long had this been happening? How much did his family know? How much had he planned? And most importantly, how could I protect myself before he decided to pull the trigger and leave on his own terms? The investigator's final report arrived at the end of the 2nd week. 14 days of surveillance. 8 confirmed hotel visits, photos, timestamps, receipts, audio. I couldn't bring myself to listen to more than once. Concrete, undeniable proof. That night, my husband came home late again. He kissed my cheek, apologized for missing dinner, and told me he loved me. I smiled back and realized something chillingly simple. He wasn't conflicted. He wasn't confused. He was comfortable. And that meant whatever was coming next, he thought he was in control. He was wrong. Once I accepted that my marriage was already over, something inside me went very still. Not numb, not yet, but focused. Grief would come later. Anger, too. Right now, clarity took over, and clarity is a dangerous thing when paired with patience. I stopped hoping for explanations. I stopped imagining confrontations where he'd cry and confess and beg. None of that mattered anymore. What mattered was making sure I didn't walk away from this blindsided and financially gutted while he and his family rewrote the story behind my back. So I prepared, quietly. The first step was money. We had a joint checking account for household expenses, but our main accounts were separate. Over the next 2 weeks, I reduced my transfers into the joint account to the exact amount needed for bills. Nothing more. Everything else went into a new account at a different bank. No drama, no announcements, just math. The second step was my business. I copied every contract, every invoice, every tax filing, every client communication. I backed them up in multiple places. One hard drive went to my office. Another went to a trusted friend's house. Paranoid, maybe. But paranoia is just preparation when you already know someone is lying to your face. The third step was documentation. Every text where he said he was working late. Every time-stamped photo of him walking into that hotel. Every message where he told me he loved me while actively betraying me. I built a timeline so clean and precise, it almost felt like I was documenting someone else's marriage, not my own. And through all of it, I acted normal. That was the hardest part. I sat across from him at dinner and asked about his day while my chest felt hollow. I laughed at jokes I didn't hear. I reached for his hand out of habit and had to remind myself not to flinch. Some nights I nearly broke, nearly asked him why, nearly told him I knew. But I didn't. Because explanations don't undo choices, and nothing he could say would change what I'd already seen. Around that time, his behavior shifted. He started being nicer, cooking dinner more often, complimenting me more, initiating intimacy more frequently. At first, I almost felt relieved until my attorney's words echoed back to me. They often overcompensate when they're hiding something. Guilt disguised as affection. Damage control masquerading as love. Then came the phone call. It was a Tuesday evening. He was in the other room, voice lowered. Door half closed. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but when someone says your name, your ears tune in automatically. "I know, Dad," he said. "The timing has to be right. I'm handling it." There was a pause. Then, "Yes, everything's ready." I stood there frozen, holding a glass of water I hadn't realized I'd poured. That was the moment it stopped being just an affair. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't confusion. This was coordinated, planned, discussed over family dinners I hadn't been invited into. Malcolm hadn't just been mocking me at Thanksgiving, he'd been letting something slip, or maybe rubbing it in. Either way, the message was clear now. They were preparing for an exit. I just didn't know when, so I decided to choose the moment myself. I started paying closer attention to his schedule. Every Tuesday and Thursday, like clockwork, he worked late. Around 5 in the evening, he'd text me about a deadline, say he wouldn't be home until 9. I'd reply with a heart emoji. He'd send one back. Meanwhile, he was checking into the same hotel with his ex-girlfriend, ordering room service, pretending he wasn't dismantling a life he'd built with me. I stopped seeing him as my husband. I started seeing him as someone I needed to outmaneuver. By the end of that week, I knew exactly what I was going to do, where I was going to do it, and when. I wasn't angry enough to scream. I wasn't emotional enough to beg. I was calm. And calm is terrifying when it comes from someone who has already grieved what you think you still have. I chose Thursday for a reason. It was his birthday. He told me that morning, casually, almost apologetically, that he had to work late. Said his boss had scheduled an emergency meeting that couldn't be moved. Promised we'd celebrate over the weekend instead. He kissed my forehead like this was just another small disappointment we'd quietly absorbed together. The private investigator confirmed what I already suspected. He wasn't working. He had dinner reservations with his ex-girlfriend at a restaurant downtown, the kind of place people go when they want an evening to feel intentional. After that, they planned to return to their usual hotel. I didn't argue with fate when it handed me that level of symmetry. I waited 30 minutes after he left. Then I changed my clothes, picked up the envelope my attorney had prepared, and drove to the restaurant. My hands were steady on the wheel. My heart wasn't racing. If anything, I felt strangely detached, like I was moving through a scene I'd already rehearsed in my head so many times that the outcome felt inevitable. They were already there when I arrived. A corner booth. Intimate. He was wearing the jacket I'd bought him last Christmas. She was leaning toward him, laughing, her hand resting comfortably on his arm. They looked happy, not nervous, not conflicted, happy in a way I hadn't seen at home in months. That was the moment something inside me finally hardened. This wasn't about escape or confusion. This was about preference. I took a table about 20 feet away, close enough to see them clearly, far enough that they didn't notice me at first. I ordered a drink and watched. He leaned in when she spoke. She touched his hand when she laughed. This wasn't new. This was practiced. When they stood to leave around 8, I stood too. He saw me first. The color drained from his face so fast it was almost frightening. His ex-girlfriend followed his gaze, confusion flashing across her features before recognition hit. I walked toward them calmly, like I wasn't about to dismantle both of their illusions. "Hey," I said, my voice even. "Happy birthday." "April," he stammered. What are you doing here?" "Having dinner," I replied. "Nice place. Good choice." His ex started to speak, then stopped when I looked at her. "You must be the ex," I said politely. "The one I've heard almost nothing about," which in hindsight makes perfect sense. She looked at him. He looked at me. Panic set in too late. "Sit down," I said, not raising my voice. "This doesn't need to be dramatic." He sat. I turned back to him and pulled out my phone. One photo, then another. Hotel entrances, parking lots, timestamps. "I hired a private investigator," I said. 14 days, 8 hotel visits, same location, same pattern. His mouth opened, closed. "Your father told me not to expect loyalty," I continued. I took his advice and verified. He started crying then. Not quietly, not convincingly, just enough to look like remorse. "April, please," he said. "Let me explain." I handed him the envelope. "Happy birthday." He opened it, scanned the first page, and collapsed into sobs. "You're divorcing me," he gasped. On my birthday. You planned a date with your ex on your birthday and told me you were working, I said. I figured you were already celebrating. His ex stood abruptly, anger replacing shock. This is insane. You can't just— I can, I interrupted calmly. And I am. I leaned in slightly. Feel free to have him. Just know that relationships built on deception don't usually end well. But good luck. I left cash on the table for my drink and walked out. My phone started ringing before I reached the car. I didn't answer. He came home just before midnight. I was sitting in the living room with the lights on, not pacing, not crying, just waiting. The front door opened quietly, like he thought maybe silence could undo what had already happened. When he saw me, he froze. For a split second, I saw something real on his face, fear not for the marriage, but for himself, for the loss of control. The conversation that followed was exhausting, in the way only emotional gymnastics can be. It started with denial. The photos don't prove anything. Then blame shifting. If you'd been more present, I wouldn't have felt so alone. Then minimization. It was mostly emotional. We barely did anything physical. Then threats. My lawyer will take everything from you. Then begging. Please, April. I love you. We can fix this. I didn't interrupt him. I let him run through every stage like a script he'd rehearsed in his head for the day he got caught, because people who plan exits always do. When he finally ran out of words, I told him he'd be sleeping in the guest room and that tomorrow we'd talk logistics. Not reconciliation. Logistics. He stormed off, called his father, and stayed on the phone until nearly 3 a.m. I heard my name more than once. I heard panic. I heard anger. What I didn't hear was accountability. The divorce moved faster than I expected. 10 weeks from filing to finalization. According to my attorney, that was quick, but only if both sides know the outcome is inevitable. The house was sold. We split the equity evenly. I lost about $45,000 of my original down payment, but fighting it would have cost more in legal fees. My business stayed mine. His attorneys tried to argue that he'd supported it emotionally over the years. The judge wasn't impressed. Retirement accounts were divided 60-40 in my favor. The evidence mattered. The deception mattered. Alimony was denied entirely. When the judge asked him if he'd been actively planning to leave the marriage, he couldn't answer. Total losses around $125,000. Painful, but survivable. His ex-girlfriend disappeared within 2 weeks of the restaurant confrontation. Apparently being someone's secret was thrilling. Being someone's public mistake was not. He moved back in with his parents. His father called me once, furious, accusing me of ruining his son's life. No, I told him calmly. I just stopped protecting the lie. The final court date was 2 weeks ago. We stood on opposite sides of the room. He looked smaller somehow, thinner, not in a way that suggested growth, in a way that suggested collapse. His father sat behind him like a scowl carved in stone. Afterward, in the hallway, Malcolm approached me. I hope you're satisfied, he said. I smiled. I actually wanted to thank you. He stared at me confused. Thanksgiving, I continued. If you hadn't told me not to expect loyalty, I would have ignored the signs for months, maybe years. You saved me from that. His face flushed red. I was joking. Were you? I asked quietly. Because your son was already sleeping with his ex when you said it. He didn't answer. I walked away without looking back. And for the first time in months, I felt something close to peace. The silence after the divorce was louder than anything that came before it. Once the paperwork was signed and the keys were handed over, there were no more meetings, no more emails between attorneys, no more arguments disguised as negotiations. Just empty space. I moved into a small apartment not far from my office. Nothing fancy, neutral walls, quiet hallways, a place that didn't echo with memories I hadn't asked to keep. Work became my anchor. My business, the thing Malcolm had always dismissed as simple, did better than it ever had. Stress has a way of sharpening focus. I landed 3 new contracts in a single quarter. Turns out when you stop carrying someone else's deception, you have a lot more energy to build your own future. He texted twice after the divorce. The first message was long, apologetic, full of regret and just enough self-awareness to sound sincere. I didn't respond. The second asked if we could talk like adults and get closure. I replied with one sentence. We did. In court. Then I blocked him. His father never called again. According to mutual acquaintances, the ones who'd quietly chosen sides, Malcolm told anyone who would listen that I'd ruined his son's life through surveillance and entrapment. The irony almost made me laugh. I hadn't entrapped anyone. I hadn't forced him into a hotel. I hadn't written those lies for him or coached him through them. I'd just documented what he chose to do when he thought I wasn't watching. Some people drifted away. Friends who had always been more his than mine stopped reaching out. That was fine. Real support is quiet and consistent, not performative. My mother called the week everything finalized, asked if I was okay. I told her I would be. She believed me. She told me dinner was at her place Sunday. No questions, no pressure, just food and space. I started therapy shortly after. Not because I regretted how I handled things, but because carrying rage feels heavier than carrying loss. My therapist said something that stuck with me. You protected your future, but you postponed your grief. She wasn't wrong. Letting myself feel the sadness, not the betrayal, but the end of what I thought I had, was harder than serving divorce papers ever was. As for him, life didn't get kinder. The ex-girlfriend never came back. His career stalled. Living under Malcolm's roof came with conditions and constant reminders of failure. The same man who had mocked me for being boring and predictable suddenly couldn't stand the reality he'd helped create. The last time I saw Malcolm was at the courthouse. As I walked past him, he muttered something under his breath about family loyalty. I didn't stop. Because here's the truth. There was no revenge in what I did. No grand victory, no celebration. Just a woman who listened when someone accidentally told her the truth, verified it, and acted before it cost her everything. If there's a lesson in all of this, it isn't about surveillance or strategy or even divorce. It's about paying attention. When people tell you who they are or who their family is, believe them. Don't argue. Don't rationalize. Don't wait for proof to fall into your lap. I didn't. And while it cost me money, comfort,